What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns and gunfighting, the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. Specifically today, we're going to be talking about taking that new shooter out to shoot. The right way, the wrong way, best practices, things like that. That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. I'm going to forego the normal bio and narrow in on the things that God has blessed me to do as far as shooting instruction, being an instructor. So, I guess my first formal way of doing this, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I taught urban warfare and desert warfare for the Marine Corps. Also, FBI certified firearms instructor. Went to the FBI Academy, got certified to teach handgun shooting. Also, I worked for another 3-letter government agency that I will not specify, but I was blessed to get a lot of certificates for that agency, up to and including advanced weapons instructor. I've also been blessed to teach at one of the largest training schools in the country for civilians, and by that measure, probably the world, to teach civilians how to shoot and be better trained. One of the big names. They're not affiliated with the podcast, so I won't throw their name out there, but a very, very big, well-known shooting school, professional firearms instructor for them. Also, it's more of a kind of check-the-box thing, but I am an NRA certified instructor. I have taught those NRA classes. And I have done that professionally, in conjunction with different organizations or just freelance as an instructor. And sometimes pro bono, just donating for an organization to get people into shooting and to help people be better shooters. It's something I'm passionate about and something that I really, really think is important, especially when I got the opportunity for youth shooting classes. As much as I can teach it, a high-level advanced course, shooting on the move, jumping over barricades, room clearing, and all that stuff, I honestly think it's more return on investment teaching a brand new person to shoot, a child especially, because then they'll grow up without those preconceived notions. And I think that's where I'm going to start this episode today. I don't often talk about politics on this show, but I imagine you can surmise where I stand on the Second Amendment. I stand with what does it say shall not be infringed. Period. End of sentence. However, you could just tell that to somebody that's on the other side that's anti-gun. Let's just use that generic term, anti-gun. Whatever that means. Leave all the political connotations and colors and ridiculous animals out of it. They're not down with guns. You could say that, but that's probably not going to win them over. That's a pretty cut and dry argument, right? Shall not be infringed means shall not be infringed. It's a right. It's a right in the Bill of Rights, like the freedom of speech, like the freedom to not be randomly searched by the government. All kinds of rights. The right to self-incrimination, the right to a speedy trial, all those kind of rights. You probably don't want those to go away, so you don't get to pick and choose. The Second Amendment says shall not be infringed, but that's probably, again, not going to win them over, because a lot of times that's the way they were raised. It's an emotional thing for them. You sitting there, especially arguing with them and calling them whatever name you want to call them, it's probably not going to get them to be pro-gun. But you know what I found is very effective at winning somebody over on guns? It's actually taking them shooting. Actually taking the time. And often it's going to mean donating your time. Because if they're anti-gun, they're probably not signing up for a gun course. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they are that open-minded. But it means volunteering. It means doing some work on your part. And I think that's more work for a lot of people than just calling somebody a name. But I think actually asking them if they're even open to going out in a safe manner and trying it. Going shooting. Don't even try and change their mind on it by political arguments or even data. Just ask them, would you be willing to go out and go shooting in a safe manner, controlled environment, to go out and actually handle a gun and go shoot? Would you be willing to do that? And if they're willing to do that, don't start bombarding them with, Fox News quotes, whatever. Be happy about that and actually take them out shooting. And again, let them get that real world data for themselves. Let them get the reality of it versus what they've been told. And I think that will do a lot more to win people over to shooting and being pro-gun than all the arguments. So there's that. And even easier if they're not anti-gun. If they're indifferent, they're neither pro nor anti-gun, they'll probably be down to go. And especially if they're kids and maybe their parents aren't into guns, but their parents aren't anti-gun, they just don't have guns, they don't go shooting. That's a great opportunity, especially if they're friends with kids that you have or kids that you know. What a golden opportunity to take them out and introduce them. And a great privilege to be the one that introduces them to what perhaps for some will be a lifelong passion. With all that being said, how does one go about this? How does one go about introducing somebody to shooting? First, obviously, start with safety. Start with safety. Now you should go and look up all the safety rules if you don't know them verbatim by heart. But the 4, sometimes 5, depending on what school, basic firearm safety rules are pretty well established, and I'm not going to read them verbatim here because that would get rather dry. But the 2 big ones I am going to talk about and harp on that you should be aware of is keep the gun pointed in a safe direction and keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. If you follow those 2, nobody will get hurt unless there's some weird random thing. And weird random things do happen, right? But there's statistical anomalies. If you keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire, so instill that good trigger discipline, and you better have it if you're teaching somebody else, and keep the gun pointed in a safe direction all the time, whether you're just getting it out of the truck to bring it to the firing line, whatever it is, you had better be good at that too because you're setting the example. Muzzle discipline, keeping the gun pointed in a safe direction. But get that safety down. A thing that can help with this is an orange chamber flag or just a bright colored chamber flag. If you don't want to spend the money to buy them, they're pretty cheap. Literally a zip tie and a piece of duct tape, you can make a good chamber flag. And with most modern guns, whatever they are, you can insert that brightly colored piece of duct tape on a zip tie that's not going to hurt your gun. And you can demonstrate clearly it's unloaded and safe, and that will make them feel better. And although you may be really comfortable around guns, you have to remember they're probably not. And they may have an emotional reaction against it. So that can help them feel better. Also, what I don't advise doing is just handing them a gun and say, hey, point it over there and try and hit that thing. What I would encourage you to do is take the gun and hopefully you have snap caps, because hopefully you're dry firing, right? This is gunfighter life. This is not I have a gun in a closet so I can wear a Second Amendment t-shirt. This is gunfighter life. You ought to have snap caps. But whatever guns you plan on having them shoot, you should demonstrate to them and explain to them the parts of the gun, the basics of how a gun works, and then whatever gun you're planning on shooting, demonstrate with them the loading and unloading procedure. Not even necessarily because they're going to remember it, and not even because they're going to load it themselves. But by doing this, you're giving them time to get comfortable with the gun, get comfortable with handling a gun. Because remember, they may have never done it before. It's also going to give some time for that nervousness to wear off if they are, in fact, having an emotional reaction or fear of a gun. It gives them time to handle it without any of the noise, without any of the recoil, without the gun going off. Just get comfortable holding a gun. And that may sound ridiculous to you if you grew up with guns, but remember, not everybody did. And as cool as you might think you are with a gun, remember, nobody popped out of their mom's womb doing Mozambique drills and speed reloads. Right? We learn those things along the way. There was a time when you didn't know that stuff, and that's where they are. So you have to remember that. Giving them that time to handle the gun, handling dummy rounds, loading the gun, unloading the gun. Hopefully it breeds quite a bit more confidence. They are more comfortable with the gun. They think they can do it. They know they can load the gun. Even if you're going to load it for them to actually fire it and hand it to them being familiar with the gun and how it works, it takes it out of this mysterious realm and into, it's basically a couple hunks of metal and some springs. It's not, this kind of doomsday device. Explain to them the fundamentals of marksmanship briefly, and you can skip a lot of those. Right? You're probably not teaching natural respiratory pause on their first time out to the range. You're probably just telling them, hey, just breathe natural, don't hold your breath, which is common with new shooters, and don't hyperventilate if they're really nervous, which is common for new shooters to do the shallow breathing because they're nervous. Just tell them to breathe normal. So a lot of these you might skip. Probably not going to get into a whole thing on, stance. Just stand natural, relaxed. This is, basics. And explain the basics to them of how the sights work. The front and the rear sight, sight alignment, sight picture, whatever kind of optic you're using. Explain that to them. And again, give them time. Don't just rush into shooting. Also, hopefully it builds some anticipation. Maybe now they're looking forward to it because you're giving them some time to get ready for it. It's much better than shoving it on them when they're not ready yet. The next one is, and I'm a big firm believer of this, is demonstrate first. You do it first. Even when I'm around teaching a class, I'm demonstrating a skill I don't think they're familiar with, and I demonstrate it first as the instructor. If you have an instructor, I'm not going to go down that road, but me as an instructor, I like to demonstrate the skill first. So you know that I have an idea of what I'm talking about, that I can actually do it. I shouldn't be asking you to do something that I can't do, and I can't do on demand. And demonstrate it for you. And you should do that with them. Whatever gun you are planning on having them shoot, you should shoot first. You should just have them watch you load it, fire it, unload it, show that it's clear, set it down. You should be demonstrating to them. When they are ready, I would have them dry fire first. Again, don't just run into the shooting. But have them shoulder the weapon or hold the gun up if it's a handgun. We'll get to what guns later. But have them dry fire. Have them, and tell them, I just want to get comfortable feeling the trigger, watching a sight. Nothing's going to happen. The gun's not going to go off. It's just going to make a click sound. And then have them do that a couple times to get comfortable. And then ask them if they're ready. And if they say they're ready, then you proceed. And then give them a round of ammunition. Ask them if they want to load it or you want to load it for them. They've got a lot going on in their mind probably. They may either want to or not want to. Whatever they decide. But now they have a round in the gun. Have them shoot that one round, set the gun down on the table, and take a deep breath. Right, they're processing this information. I would do that a time or two. Again, one round, have them shoot it, set it on the table, then maybe have them load it if they haven't been doing it. Load it and shoot it and put it on the table. That way there's no chance that they're going to freak out when the gun goes off and have another round go somewhere it shouldn't because they only have one round. And set the gun down on the table. And ask them if they're ready for 2 rounds. And you see where this is going, right? I'm not going to go through the progression of rounds. But don't just load them up a full magazine and say, here, have fun. They don't know what they're doing. And you are the RSO, you are the range safety officer, even if there is one. If you brought that person that hasn't shot before, you're responsible for them. You should be in dominion and control of that firearm and them. And if something goes awry, you should be able to stand in and take charge of that situation. What guns? This one is pretty easy, a 22. Now, if you're only into black rifles and ARs and Glock 19s, this is where I'm going to tell you you're probably wrong on that. If that's what you have and they really want to go, I'm not telling you not to do it, but that's not the right tool for the job. You should have a 22 for a lot of reasons. For survival, for marksmanship training, for yourself, for high volume training, for honing in on the fundamentals of marksmanship, for high volume practice that doesn't cost an arm and a leg. And I see this a lot, especially from people that have didn't really know anything about guns or weren't into guns before the military or law enforcement, and now they want to be instructors. They don't even know really anything other than a Glock 19 or an AR-15 or similar things. I don't think they're the right tool for this. A 22, and specifically a 22 rifle. For most of us, that means a Ruger 1022. They are unarguably almost the best for this. If you don't have one, instead of going out and buying the next plastic fantastic polymer striker fired handgun, I really encourage you to get a 1022. Or if you want something similar, like if you want a bolt action, get a Savage or a CZ or whatever, but a long gun in 22. And I specify the long gun for this. If you're getting somebody new into guns, I don't recommend starting with a handgun. I know many people do, and I know especially from my experience, a lot of women gravitate towards the handguns because they're small. And they feel less intimidated. They even gravitate towards small handguns. But handguns are harder to shoot than long guns by a large margin, and smaller handguns are even harder still. Don't be the man that the first gun that a female shoots is a snub-nose 38 and say, here you go. I'm not saying that's a bad gun or a bad carry gun for you or for an experienced shooter. That is not the gun I would give to a female to have them shoot their first shots. It's just not. It's not the right tool for the job. Again, have a long gun in 22. I specify long gun. It's going to be easier for them to shoot. They're probably going to do a much better job at marksmanship. And it's safer for you to control. If they go to turn around or something, you can just stop that muzzle with your hand. You should be standing behind them or slightly to the side. If they go to turn around or something with that gun, you can grab it. There's a lot less chance that they're going to point the gun somewhere they shouldn't with the long gun. And it's not that AR-15s are hard to shoot or punishing in recoil. They're not. In fact, they're very kind of easy to shoot, but not as easy as a 22. And a lot of times, new shooters have an aversion to the noise and the blast. And AR-15s are quite noisy. Much louder than a 22. Even with ear protection and stuff, they're still pretty loud. I think the right tool for the job for this is a 22. If you don't have one, you don't have a buddy that has one that you can borrow and that you handle and get used to before you take them out, so you don't look like the noob on the range. But if you don't have one and a buddy doesn't have one, I'm not saying not to do it, but that's the right tool for the job in my opinion. And if you are going to have them shoot a handgun on their first trip, again, a 22. If you, again, are a gunfighter, you're serious about training, why do you not have a 22 handgun? Again, if you already own a decent defensive handgun, before you go out and buy another one that's espoused as being 5% better in this way or that way, have a 22 for high volume training and for this, for taking out new shooters. It's the right tool for the job. It really is. Again, I'm not saying you can't do it without it, but if you want the highest propensity for them to have a good time, an enjoyable time, and maybe let them ask, do you have anything bigger if they're into that, right? They might right away be like, oh, that was great. Let me try something else. But don't start them off with that, because if they don't like it to begin with, it's going to be a lot bigger hurdle to get them over. The lady who's ever gone and shot a 38 Special Snub-Nose revolver probably thinks she doesn't like shooting that much. Or the 90-pound person that was handed a 12-gauge shotgun and said, here you go, and nobody really instructed them to keep it tight into their shoulder, and it beat the crap out of them. Right? They're probably going to think they don't like shooting that much, and that's not what you want. Your goal is not to make a funny YouTube video and to make fun of somebody and, assert your dominance as a shooter. That is not the goal of this. If that's your mindset, you got problems. Your goal for this hopefully should be introducing a new shooter to a fun, safe, enjoyable experience that they really like and want to come back to, right? That's the point. And again, I think for that, the 22 is the best option for that. Loading that 22 magazine, that 1022 with one round. Having them just load it and hand it to them, have them shoot a shot, and then have them load it. Maybe load the magazine and have them rack it, make them feel like they're doing something, and then maybe have them load it the entire way. And then again, once they're comfortable, give them a couple of rounds. It's fun. I have taken many, I've been blessed to take many people out with their first time shooting. All but one, I think, had a really good time, maybe two. But I'm talking, I can't remember the number of people I've taken out, been blessed to take out for their first time shooting. Some people just have that thing in their head that they're just not going to like it. And no matter what, they're just not going to like it. But the vast majority of people, if you introduce them in a fun way, like going out and just shooting with a 22 in a safe manner, it's a lot of fun, let's be honest. Let's not forget that shooting can be fun. And that's what it should be for them. It should be safe and fun and enjoyable. And they should feel like they got something out of it. And again, I would stay away from the political talk. I would stay away from all that. You're not trying to, even if it is a goal of yours, it should not be the goal of you going to this shooting venture, going on this trip to go shooting with them. It shouldn't be to get them to vote for your political candidate or whatever. It should be to get them introduced to guns in a safe and fun manner. They say something about guns that's incorrect that they heard from whatever viewpoint they've had. You can correct it with a fact. If they're like, isn't the AR-15, if they want to move up and shoot an AR-15, if they say, isn't this really powerful? You say, actually, no. It's actually really mild on the spectrum of centerfire rifle calibers. It's pretty weak compared to most other centerfire rifles, like most other deer hunting cartridges. It's actually on the very, very low end, and some people will consider not even powerful enough for that. So no, it's not super powerful. You can correct them in a way like that, but don't get into the politics. If they say, isn't that a machine gun, or whatever thing they've heard, you can use facts and say, no, it's not. It's a semi-automatic rifle. They've been around, for a long time. But you see where I'm going with that. Don't bombard them with what you think they should believe. Give them facts if they ask about them and they're really incorrect, and you in a helpful way, give them the facts. And then again, be safe, and less important, but also if you want them to have an enjoyable experience, basic stuff like check the weather, have cold water if you're going in the summer, have something warm if you're going in the winter. Things that I don't normally do or care about, like I might bring a pop-up thing for shade. I don't normally care about that kind of stuff. I don't normally care about the bugs and stuff. I just ignore it. I'll just get a little bit of sun, but you might want to bring cold water, bug spray, sunblock, all that stuff, right? That's your responsibility if you're taking them out. Again, you want them to have a good time. Obviously, the PPE, the personal protective equipment, don't forget the eyes and the ears. And if they're a new shooter, even if it is a 22, I would recommend double plugging, meaning you give them the soft foam earplugs to put in their ears, and you give them the earmuffs to put on top of their ears. You want it to be as gentle and experienced as possible, especially if you're going to an indoor range. And I don't actually like indoor ranges, but if an indoor range is what you have, and I've worked at indoor ranges, I've managed indoor ranges, I get why they exist, but they're just a lot louder. And even if you're having them shoot a 22, if the guy next to you is shooting a 7-inch AR, it's like a flashbang. It's not actually, I'm familiar with flashbangs, I've used flashbangs, but it's loud. You get the idea. And that's probably going to jar them more than what they're doing. So if you can do like an outdoor range, if you have that ability, but the double plugs, but especially on an indoor range, give them the foam ear protection and the over the ears. They're going to have a better experience, especially on an indoor range if they have that. Even me, when I shoot on an indoor range, I like that. I like both sets of ear protection. And read that person when they're comfortable, when they're not comfortable. And the goal shouldn't be to have them shoot everything that you own and brag about your gun collection, right? If they shoot the 22 and they had fun shooting the 22 and you can tell they're pretty overwhelmed or they've had enough, that's it for the day. They can ask you again to come out and shooting, and maybe you can try something different. The goal is not to brag about your gun collection and have them shoot your AR and your riot shotgun. Right, that's not the point. The point is for them to have a safe, fun experience. Now, if it's somebody that's really into that and they really ask and they want to try it, work them up progressively. If they're comfortable with the 22, I certainly wouldn't have any problem letting somebody shoot a AR-15. I guess an AR-15 is better English. I wouldn't have any problem having them shoot an AR-15 the first time out if they were comfortable with the 22. And if they're comfortable with the 22 handgun, maybe moving them up to a full size 9mm handgun. No, nothing wrong with that. If they have demonstrated that they're competent and comfortable and having a good time, and that's the key word, that they want to move up to something else. But if they just want to shoot the 22 the first time out, that's great. That's a win. Also have some fun stuff for them to shoot at a safe distance, right? don't move the steel in close because they're new, because there's a minimum safe distance for steel. But steel targets, hopefully you have some of those, are generally a lot more fun to shoot at than paper. And don't be the guy that leaves trash all over the range, but, fun things. It can be fun. Tin cans, aluminum cans. You have any of the little steel spinning targets. Those things, again, fun. It can be fun. That's a good thing. You're not trying to turn them into John Wick, in the first 30 minutes of their shooting experience. So, just some best practices from somebody that's been blessed to teach a lot of people, whether military, law enforcement, civilian, youth, elderly, the spectrum, right? Just a good broad spectrum. Some good practices for getting a new shooter, a new person that's either done it so long ago they forgot, or done it once and had a bad experience, or somebody that's never shot in their life. Bringing them out and having them have a good, safe, and fun experience. All right, with that, I'm going to start wrapping up. The tactical tip of the day. Don't instruct your wife. Maybe even your daughter, depending on the relationship. But, for example, myself, you would think with me, with all my background, state rifle and pistol champion, advanced weapons instructor, FBI, that my wife would just love for me to teach her. Not the case. And people have paid me a lot of money to teach them. I think my wife would want that. But in general, the dynamic is just different, right? If you want your wife or your woman in your life or whomever to get into shooting, pay somebody else to do it. If you actually want them to do it and listen and pay attention and not feel like they're getting criticized, again, it's just a different dynamic. I love my wife. I'd take a bullet for my wife. If we're on the range shooting and my wife wants help and she comes to me and says, how do I do this? I would be happy to show her. But I'm not going to be giving her courses. It's just a different dynamic. Trust me on that. Maybe in some situations it works, but if you want your wife to carry, to get into shooting, don't be the one to teach her. Instead of, again, going out and buying that next plastic fantastic or buying her a snub-nosed 38, instead pay somebody else to teach her. Somebody that's going to have the patience and they're going to be paid to do it. He's going to view them as a professional. Just, it's a different dynamic. So that's my advice there, my tactical tip. If it's your wife, a spouse, that woman in your life, maybe even a friend, if you guys are always kind of ribbing each other and having this kind of rivalry and you're into guns and they're not, and you really want them to be into guns but they're not, it might be a better idea to give them a gift of paying somebody else for an hour of instruction, like a professional. Have them take them out and introduce them to shooting. And then once they like shooting, then you guys can maybe go out and shoot together and you can help them out if they ask for help. Or if you see them doing something really egregiously unsafe. But other than that, keep it to yourself. It's just a different dynamic, in my opinion, if you want the best. Now, if your wife comes to you and she wants you to take her out shooting, then that's a whole different deal. But in general, pay somebody else to do it. That's my tactical tip on that. In getting into the tactical verse of the day, if you are blessed to own guns and go out shooting and be in that world and carry a sword, blessings are meant to be shared. They're not meant to be hoarded. They're not meant to be held over other people's heads. You're blessed so that you can bless others. Hebrews 13:16. But do not forget to do good and to share, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. Also, 2 Corinthians 9. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to bless you abundantly, so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. Commentary here. Your gun, hopefully you don't just carry a gun to protect yourself, right? Hopefully you carry a gun to protect others. You see yourself in that role as Jesus told his disciples to have a sword. Swords are a weapon, right? They're not meant for making charcuterie boards of cheese and meat. A sword is a weapon. If you feel called to be that person, That blessing is meant to be shared, whether it's protecting other people's lives or getting other people into shooting. And again, that might take some sacrifice on your part. It may mean an entire range trip where you don't get to shoot that much or at all except for demonstration, where you're focused on them. Or your guns, for example. They're a blessing that God's given you to be shared. And if you can use those guns to help other people get into guns and maybe turn them into a protector or an alpha male, or just better prepared to protect, or put food on the table if that's their motivation for getting into guns, right? They're meant to be shared. Share those blessings. If you want other people to get into shooting, share those blessings. That's going to be far more effective than arguing the politics and things like that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Feel free to share any of this content. Again, because blessings are meant to be shared. Now, some people will say don't share their Patreon content. If you're a patron, you get additional content, special content. Feel free to share that too. If you feel like you know somebody that needs that content or will benefit from that content, whatever I have is a gift from God. You can share it. You can share that content. For instance, this episode I plan on going out far earlier to them and commercial free. If you get this and you want to share it or any other patron content, then share it. And if you listening to this as a regular listener want to share, or you think somebody would benefit from hearing this, share it. Please do. Blessings are meant to be shared. With that, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.